Good afternoon and welcome to the Shenoy Memorial Lecture 2025. My name is Kumar Anand and I will be your moderator this afternoon. Our distinguished speaker today is Professor Arvind Panagariya, and the title for his talk is Nehru-Era Economic History and Thought and Their Lasting Impact. The talk by Professor Panagariya will be for about 45 minutes, after which we will be having about 30 to 40 minutes for a question and answer session with the audience who are joining us live. You can type your question in the Q&A box in the Zoom here or in the YouTube comment section, wherever you are joining us from. Professor B.R. Shenoy, though a noted economist, may not be well known to all of you, but his ideas have affected the lives of almost all of you, especially those born after 1991. Professor Bellikot Raghunath Shenoy was born in 1905 in Bellikot, Kerala. Born to a poor farmer as one of the 11 children, he was inspired by Gandhiji's message and left home when still a boy to join the national movement. Arrested in Bombay and jailed in Nagpur, he was released to finish his schooling. He took a train north to Banaras Hindu University, where he got scholarships for a BA and MA in economics. He then studied further at the London School of Economics and was perhaps the second Indian to publish a scholarly economics article in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 1931. The young BRS, then at the age of 26, was critical of the internationally renowned John Maynard Keynes. Returning to India, he worked at the RBI and was Indian representative at the International Monetary Fund in Washington. Disagreeing publicly with the Government of India's policies of centralized economic planning, he resigned to take up his lifelong cause of arguing for a market economy as a vital engine to India's economic development, removal of poverty, and achieving mass prosperity. Professor B.R. Shenoy was reviled and attacked in personal terms for his liberal economic views and policy recommendations. Professor Shenoy's ceaseless work bore fruit in the end, laying the intellectual groundwork for the economic reforms of 1991, but he did not live to see the day. He passed away in 1978. You may say of the successful reforms, great, an example of the power of ideas. But the huge opposition in those days to Shenoy's lonely efforts inside the country also shows the power of wrong economic ideas. Although that era is gone, its wrong ideas must be remembered and errors understood, lest they be repeated. Professor Arvind Panagariya is a scholar and a lifelong student of ideas, with a recent book on the ideas and policy of the Nehru era. He is a professor of economics and the Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy at Columbia University. He has served as the first vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, Government of India, in the rank of a cabinet minister. Professor Panagariya has authored more than 15 books. His 2008 book, one of my favorites, India the Emerging Giant, was listed as a top pick in 2008 by The Economist and described as the definitive book of the Indian economy by Fareed Zakaria of the CNN. The Economist has described his 2014 book, Why Growth Matters with Jagdish Bhagwati, as a manifesto for the policymakers and analysts. Scientific papers by Professor Panagariya have appeared in the top economics journals such as American Economic Review, Quarterly Journal of Economics, Review of Economic Studies, and International Economic Review. He writes a monthly column in the Times of India, and his guest columns have appeared in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and India Today. In March 2012, the Government of India honored Professor Panagariya with Padma Bhushan, and most recently, he has been the chairman of the 16th Finance Commission. So on behalf of the Center for Civil Society, New Delhi, and the Economic Research Center Trust, Mangalore, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our speaker, Professor Arvind Panagariya, to deliver the B.R. Shenoy Memorial Lecture 2025. Professor Panagariya, over to you.
Thank you, Kumar, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you also for inviting me to deliver this lecture. As an economist who has championed the cause of market, I have greatly admired Professor Shenoy. And really, it's quite remarkable how he could have been what he was in terms of his ideas in the years that he lived. I've written somewhere, I think, probably in this book, the Nehru book, that when Milton Friedman commented in 1955 on this second five-year plan. He was completely left unheard. Hardly anybody even knew about the note that he wrote. And I go on to say that Milton Friedman was hardly accepted till then, even within the United States. So he had no chance of being heard in India. So that is the milieu around this time, and how an economist from within India would have been someone whom Milton Friedman and P.T. Bauer would admire, would have come up in India, is itself actually is a remarkable fact in itself. And then the other aspects of his life on which you just touched, the fact that at a very, very early age, he joined the freedom movement, and then went on to spend time in jail with none other than Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, who then actually spotted his talent. And, there's a good case of how the destiny works in funny ways, that B.R. Shenoy ended up in jail with Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, who was the founder of the Banaras Hindu University, who then spotted his talent and said, "Why don't you join the Banaras Hindu University?" So it's a very interesting story, I would say, of luck and destiny working in strange sort of ways. It is something that we all, at some point or the other experience in our lives. My references to Shenoy will actually continue to come through as I speak. So, the normal practice in a lecture like this is to really speak extensively first about the person after whom the lecture is named. But since for the subject that I've chosen, he would continue to appear through the talk, I would not elaborate on his life further. So let me get to the subject of the lecture that I've chosen, which is the Nehru-Era Economic History and Thought and its lasting impact. So here, the subject is every word in the title and the topic has something about which I'm going to say, history and thought. So it's about economic history, and it's also about the economic thought of the time, and how it has left the impact on India till today, and that's the lasting impact part of it. So first and foremost, my starting point is to clarify or clear up a common kind of misconception that exists about Nehru. It is commonly believed that Nehru was, went to Cambridge to study at an early age, and there picked up Fabian socialism and really turned into this Fabian socialist, which is then what he ended up implementing in India after he became the Prime Minister. That's completely actually incorrect narrative of Nehru. Because initially, I will not go into the details, but I'll just point out that initially, when Nehru was a very radical socialist, bordering communism. And that's something, which was, for me, a discovery when writing this book. And that was the starting point, really, that's what ultimately got me interested in pursuing the subject much further. Just to give you a sense of, how radical Nehru was, and certainly was not a moderate or Fabian socialist initially. I'll just read out, a couple of things. One actually is his in December 1933. Some foreign visitors had come in, and Nehru had given an interview to them, and the media reacted, saying that the remarks that Nehru made amounted to defending fascism or something. So Nehru got very angry and upset, and so he issued a press statement saying that the only real choice any nation has is between fascism and communism, and I unequivocally choose communism between those two. So that's but more substantively, he was the president of Indian National Congress in 1936, which and the and the AICC met for its convention, for its annual convention in Lucknow. So this was an address he gave in the Lucknow session, from which I'll quote briefly, just as evidence that how radical Nehru was at the time. Says, I see no way of ending the poverty, the vast unemployment, the degradation, and the subjection of the Indian people except through socialism. That involves vast and revolutionary changes in our political and social structure, the ending of vested interests in land and industry, as well as the feudal and autocratic Indian states system. That means the ending of private property market. He's saying, this is a quote I'm reading, that means the ending of private property, except in a restricted sense, and the replacement of the present profit system by a higher ideal of cooperative service. In short, it means a new civilization radically different from the present capitalist order. He goes on, some glimpse we can see, some glimpse we can have of this new civilization in the territories of the USSR. Much has happened there, which has pained me greatly and with which I disagree. But I look upon that great and fascinating unfolding of a new order and a new civilization as the most promising feature of our dismal age. If the future is full of hope, it is largely because of Soviet Russia and what it has done. And I'm convinced that if some world catastrophe does not intervene, this new civilization will spread to other lands and put an end to the wars and conflicts which capitalism feeds. So that is how strongly he felt, that is how radical he was and how far he was willing to actually go. And this, of course, spooked all the industrialists of the time and created a major debate in the Bombay industrial circus and whatnot. And some of them approached Gandhiji to kind of mollify Nehru and so forth. But in any case, that's how it was. Now, by the time we come to the formation of the interim government, and Nehru is made the prime minister, and the Constituent Assembly is convenes and all, you see very different Nehru. He's very moderate. He's actually defending industrialists against the hardcore socialists within the Congress party, who are pushing very hard for wholesale nationalization of the industries. So by this time Nehru has become a moderate. It's not clear, there is no definitive evidence of how this transition happened, but most likely this happened between 1938 and 1940, when Nehru presided over the National Planning Committee of the Congress Party. This was a committee appointed by Subhash Bose, and consisted of scientists, economists, politicians. So it was a very diverse committee. But the industrialists, some of the leading industrialists were a part of this committee. And this is where Nehru had to directly confront the industrialists, and industrialists had to directly confront Nehru. And it seems that they both actually realized that they needed the other. Industrialists realized that Nehru is hell-bent to put in place a very socialist system. And Nehru realized that without the support of the industrialists, he can't really make a success of his own plan, because ultimately growth has to happen, and growth cannot, that means industrialization, and he could not really dispense with India's industrialists if industrialization was to succeed. So I think he writes about this in the Discovery of India and all, and the industrialists come halfway and Nehru comes halfway. So you can see that industrialists write the Bombay Plan, which is not terribly different from the second five-year plan. And Nehru became a bit more moderate. He accommodated the private sector within his own second five-year plan. So that is where I think there's a meeting of the minds and needs of the two sides. In hindsight, if you look at Bombay Plan, really it's an endorsement more or less of the second five-year plan, which is a bit surprising coming from industrialists. But in any case, so that's a story. That's a background on Nehru himself. Now, Nehru was very clear in his mind that, and this was this was discussed extensively actually in the National Planning Committee between 1938 and 1940, that look, if India would, well, first of all, if we were, it was clear in his mind that, they are going to start planning soon after independence. And the objective of that planning was going to be to put an end to India's appalling poverty. And these are his words, appalling poverty. He refers to in those words to India's poverty. And he says that, look, this could not be done without substantial economic growth taking place. Because India was so poor that redistribution could hardly go far. And in his own words, he says that, there was only poverty to redistribute. And this is also more or less a quote. These are his words, that there was only poverty to redistribute. So we simply couldn't get anywhere without some substantial growth. And there in the Discovery of India, he says that, look, we needed about in 10 years' time, we needed 600% growth. But that was simply not feasible. We realized that, so we set ourselves a target of 300% growth in 10 years. That didn't actually happen, but at least, the thinking, the basic idea of Nehru was quite correct. However, the details of how he then decided to implement this plan of his were quite flawed. And you'll see as I go forward, you'll see that, it's not just that he thought in these terms, but much of Indian intelligentsia, all the economists thought in very similar ways also. So in a way, Nehru can't be faulted in this sense. It's simply, you can speculate that, if in Nehru's place there had been Patel, perhaps we would have had a different system. But otherwise, Nehru was simply not alone. However flawed, as we will see, the system and the model that he put in place may have been, but at the time, he had full support. So I will talk about, when I said economic thought, we'll talk about that. So Nehru, what is Nehru's approach? What is Nehru's strategy? What is Nehru's model? One, industrialization is an objective, meaning, objective is really poverty elimination, but the instrument for that is industrialization and growth. That part is correctly conceived. The second plank of his model is that he wants self-sufficiency. It's not in the sense of import substitution that he's pushing self-sufficiency. It's more in his thinking. He is coming from the fact that engagement in international trade gives rise to these imperialist tendencies. And he said, we neither wanted to be imperialist ourselves, nor did we want to be victims of imperialism yet again. And therefore, we wanted to stay away from the whirlwind of this international trade. So it was a different thinking, but and he didn't think in terms of a kind of import substitution driven model. Instead, his thinking was that over time we will rejig our production basket to what is our consumption basket. So we'll change the production basket. So you'll see that he doesn't actively kind of tries to shut down the imports totally. The shutting down of the imports happens over time because of the foreign exchange control or foreign exchange shortage that will appear by about 1956 or so. So in any case, so self-sufficiency is one of the planks of his model. Then another piece of it is socialism, which means that the state ought to have the control of the means of production. And now, in this conception, once you want self-sufficiency, also the context of this period 1950 is academic, even among the academics, is that to increase growth you need to invest. So efficiency, productivity was not a part of the discourse, and Nehru never thought actually that productivity mattered. He thought that investment is what you need to do to get high rate of growth. If you need to do investment for growth, then you need machinery for growth. If you're going to have machinery, are you going to import it? And said, no, the whole objective of this, our planning is to achieve self-sufficiency. And therefore, what we are going to do is we are going to start producing machines. And so he talks about, investing in steel companies, steel mills, but also talks about, investing in the production of machines that produce machines. Right, because ultimately he wants self-sufficiency in machine production, so anything that goes into the production of machine, including steel, most notably, has to be produced domestically. So this basically the heavy industry, the quote unquote the heavy industry becomes central to his thinking and central to his plan. This of course gets reinforced by Mahalanobis, who had been working with Nehru off and on. Well, he knew Nehru's mind starting from around 1940 or so. By 1949-50, he's appointed as, the statistical advisor to the cabinet or something, or maybe it's a little later, but somewhere there he gets appointed. And so he's closely working with Nehru. Nehru then tells him to write this draft second 5-year plan. But what Mahalanobis is really executing is what Nehru's model really is. We, as we studied, we all thought of, that the Mahalanobis was the big culprit here. He wrote this Mahalanobis model, which really kind of created this very heavy duty capital intensive industrial structure and so forth. But my own reading of the entire literature and the history, economic history, is that that really Mahalanobis more or less wrote the equations around what Nehru wanted. And so heavy industry became central to Nehru's model. But at the same time, Nehru had to worry about what will we do about employment, right? The workers, people have to be employed somewhere. So he said, and there was also a political angle to the thing that Gandhians wanted the more cottage industry driven kind of development. So for Nehru, it was both politically convenient and economically, it fitted the thinking that employment will come from the cottage, village, household industry. This is where all the employment will be, and this is where, therefore, the consumer goods will be produced as well, right? Because as incomes rise, demand for consumer goods would rise, and therefore, we need consumer goods production. But we can handle that. We can put it all in the consumer goods industries. So that became, agriculture was kind of there, but not very central to Nehru's thinking. But basically, agriculture was there to provide food. And as long as there were no food shortages, Nehru was okay. I mean, so it was not, he was not effectively, thinking centrally of agriculture. I mean, agriculture becomes central only after Nehru passes away, and then Lal Bahadur Shastri comes in, and you get these back-to-back droughts that really prompts Lal Bahadur Shastri to go into this green revolution. That's a later story. But now here, so Mahalanobis writes the draft second five-year plan, and Nehru, being very consultative, formally appoints a panel of economists. These are 21 economists led by C.D. Deshmukh, who is both the finance minister at the time and a member of the planning commission. The power structure was very different at the time, because much of the power had come to reside in planning commission. So the finance minister was a member of the planning commission here, which today you will not imagine that this would ever happen, because the rank of the planning commission member actually is below that of the vice chairman and the finance minister. But he was a member. He was therefore became the chair of this panel, economist panel, and the deputy chair was Gadgil, who would later also head the planning commission. So this panel of economists, of which, well, the panel was brought in all the leading economists of India with a very diverse geographical regional representation. So there were economists from West Bengal, economists from South, economists from West, East, everywhere. So it really was not, B.R. Shenoy was a member of this economist panel. The charge to the economist panel was that, comment, whatever wisdom you need to, you would like to impart, write your papers yourselves on what India should do, and then also comment on the draft five-year plan of Mahalanobis. So a lot of papers got written, by the way. There were almost collection of, I think, something like 35 or 36 papers, all of which I read in writing this. These were very long papers, actually. And lo and behold, mostly the economist panel, when it submitted its report, was very, very supportive of the whole exercise. And meaning that endorsed basically very resoundingly the draft five-year plan, draft second five-year plan written by Mahalanobis. So heavy industry approach here got the blessing of the economist panel. This is where enters B.R. Shenoy, who actually attaches to the long comment by the economist panel, a dissenting note. His dissenting note is all about the size of the plan. Now here, actually, there's a bit of a misconception around, at least I found. Here, he doesn't attack the central element of the model, which is the heavy industry, or even actually the socialist part of it, which I forgot to mention, but I should mention that the socialist part of it was going to come from this public sector leading the heavy industry. Because the argument given there was that the private sector didn't have enough resources to actually do heavy industry, and therefore the public sector was going to have to do the heavy industry. So that is a socialist part of the Nehru's framework. Now, and Nehru took the view, by the way, that we are not going to do it through nationalization. Instead, what we are going to do is expand the public sector over time. More and more investment will come over time from the public sector, and that will eventually lead to the rise, to the increased share of the public sector in the production activity. So that was that plank. Now, returning to the story, Shenoy really, in this dissent note, didn't quite attack actually the central and the weakest feature of this model, which is the decision on heavy industry reliance, that the investment will be all done in heavy industry by the state and the private sector, actually. And the instrument, of course, was going to be partly this, because state is going to do that investment. So there is no issue on that. But they also needed that the private sector doesn't take the investable resources and put them into light industry. That was also to be controlled. And so for that, you created this license permit Raj, meaning, investment licensing was introduced through a 1951 act, which had already been put in place, the IDRA, the Industries Development and Regulation Act of 1951, which basically gave the government very extensive powers to control the private sector activity through licensing and actually distribution and price controls. So it gave powers both for licensing system, investment licensing, as well as the price and distribution controls. So returning to the debate that was underway, so Shenoy basically said that, look, this size of the plan is too large, and you are therefore going to have to, and this was explicit in the plan, that you're going to finance it very heavily by deficit financing, and that is going to be inflationary, and that will very quickly make Indian products product uncompetitive vis-a-vis the foreign products. All of which happened, actually, so he was clearly right, there is no doubt. But as yet, even Shenoy is not attacking actually the central feature of the plan, which is really the heavy industry part of it. And indeed, also it's what led to heavy industry focus, which was, fundamentally the self-sufficiency. The pursuit of self-sufficiency is what put you on that road. Now, one should understand that at this time, and even till today, actually, India is a very labor-abundant economy. Capital was incredibly scarce. The national income was very low, and then the savings rate at the time was just 7%. So savings were small, which means that, your scope for investment, investable resources were quite meager. And so how are you going to really, with that little investment, create these massive steel mills without putting everything into those steel mills, which is exactly what happened. So, Peter Bauer has this incredible statistic that, the development expenditure on education and primary education in the second five-year plan was simply half of what was invested in one single steel mill. So, there were 3 steel mills that were invested in, and only half of one steel mill's investment went into the entire, 5-year plan as development expenditure on education. So that gives you an idea, of how scarce the capital was. Now, in another way, if you think about it, labor is your abundant factor, abundant production factor. That's what you got in massive volume. That is the factor you need to make productive. You really need to exploit the productivity of that factor. Capital is only going to get you that far because it's simply too scarce. And so when you leave this entire kind of massive labor force in these small cottage industry type of production structure, you are not increasing its productivity. There's no, snowball chance in hell that this productivity could rise, because productivity increase over time requires the workers working with some capital. And over time, more capital becomes available, you work with more capital. So your skill formation itself is actually tied to production activity in the factories. But there are no factories. The only factories are steel mills, where you are employing a minuscule part of your labor force. So those guys are getting their skills, but anyway, those are engineers and managers, etc. So the bulk of your labor force gets no productivity increase. So this is how this is going to unfold. Now, nevertheless, just to complete the story on the economic thought, basically all economists, domestic ones, as well as number of foreign economists and statisticians were also invited by Malone Base to comment on the second five-year plan. They all endorsed it. They all very enthusiastically endorsed it, that is the right way to go. So Nehru was obviously very happy that the endorsement. Politically, Nehru was uncontested, because after Sardar Patel died in December 1950, there was no equal to Nehru. I mean, the effectively, if you think about it, most of the other leaders left were very, we can call them pygmies if you wish, but basically they were not of his own stature. So his word was more or less accepted by everybody. So some voices came, some political voices did oppose in the parliamentary debates and all. I mean, that's a job of the opposition. Swatantra Party had not yet arrived, actually, by the way, and the kind of criticism that came from the Minu Masani and the others was later. There was a forum for free enterprise presided over by A.D. Shroff, which existed in 1956. But they explicitly said that, we are not a pressure group. We are simply a forum where the ideas are aired and where we try to disseminate the ideas, pro-market, basically pro-private sector ideas, free enterprise ideas, but we are not a pressure group, and they never worked like that. So in effect, Nehru really had no serious opposition. And so the second five-year plan was implemented, and all the other things that followed automatically from it happened, meaning that investment licensing happened as a result of it. Public sector, of course, was a deliberate choice, and licensing naturally came to control the private sector from going into activities that would fritter away the resources, investable resources, into non-heavy industry or light manufacturing, light industry. In fact, light industry was positively discriminated against. Textile machinery, for example. I mean, India was very successful in textile markets. In the late 40s, India had about 10% share in the global textile market, a very vibrant textile industry, but it was not allowed to expand. It was not allowed to even get new capital, new machinery, because, innovations were happening. The Japanese, Americans, UK were inventing new machines, textile machines, and they needed to actually replace, but they got no capital, no foreign exchange to do that. And indeed, they were forced, given very high excise duties, so that the cottage industry can compete with it. I mean, the view in the administration was that, well, how will the cottage industry compete if excise, because these are large mills, they are super efficient, their costs are low, and therefore we got to give them some kind of handicap. So handicaps were high excise duty, no foreign exchange to change to renew the capital, to bring in more modern machinery, and at some point they even required them to start producing a part of their production to be khadi. So that they have to also join in the movement for khadi, and so they were, in this sense, given handicaps. So that is where the whole thing unfolded. Now, one piece that needs to be here brought in is that the trade policy. Not on trade policy, Nehru was very hands-off. He never talked about trade policy. What had happened was that at the beginning of the Second World War, the United Kingdom had to, because of its own inefficient industries, had to adopt foreign exchange control. So as they adopted foreign exchange control, it automatically got extended to most of the colonies as well. And so India also became a part of it. And to administer the foreign exchange control, of course, you had to also put in place import controls. So import licensing got introduced, and everything that we later on learned about the import control machinery in India in the post-independence era, the basic machinery, all of it was actually invented during the Second World War. So there was an essentiality condition that some ministry has to testify or to certify that whatever is being imported is essential. Then there was domestic availability angle, that if the product is domestically available, then it should not be allowed to be imported. So domestic availability condition had also been put in place during this time. Open general licensing idea, certain products would be on open general licensing, which means that for those products, you don't need the license. So that was also part of the Second World War, wartime import control machinery. So all of it had been evolved. That was left in place. It was never kind of, any legislation that's in place, any machine that's in place usually doesn't get easily eliminated. So it was not eliminated, it existed. Now, India also ran a lot of balance of payments surpluses during this period. And that allowed India to accumulate very large balances. These are called the sterling balances. So India had good foreign exchange balance coming out of the Second World War. So as India became independent, so it could draw upon those sterling balances to issue import licenses quite liberally. So until 1956-57, if you look even at the structure of imports, plenty of consumer goods are being allowed, they're being imported. So there was no, license had to be acquired, but generally you applied for license, you will get the license. And so it was very liberal trade policy during this period. And even thinking was liberal. I quote from some of the newspaper editorials, actually. The Times of India is the only archives I was able to access. And there actually there are a lot of editorials written that what is this licensing doing? Same, they complain about corruption, they complain about delays, they complain about all sorts of things, and just put an end to it. This is not friendly to the industrialists. Even some ministers at the time, commerce ministers, actually are making speeches about, which is very pro-free trade kind of, pro-export kind of. There is also a report that gets written, which I describe in great detail, which talks about how exports are very important and what India should do to promote exports, etc. So there's a lot of this written. But by 1956, foreign exchange runs out. There is a balance of payments crisis. And this is here again, Shenoy has the right idea. B.R. Shenoy comes in, he writes that, look, devalue the rupee. And he was the lone voice. Even Eddie Schroff, who was running the enterprise or Forum for Free Enterprise, wrote against devaluation. So he was critical, actually, of Shenoy's view. But Shenoy had exactly the right idea, because at that time, economy was doing quite well. Second five-year plan was being put in place. Investments were being done. So if you devalued significantly the rupee, your goods will become competitive. That would be give you all the help that you need from foreign exchange side. But somebody told Nehru that about this talk of devaluation, and Nehru reacted saying that this is fantastic nonsense. And those are, again, his words, in quotes, fantastic nonsense. So in the end, obviously, devaluation got no salience whatsoever. This was, I think, 1958 article or something. So by 57, they had clamped down on the foreign exchange control very heavily. So 1956, 57 onwards, well, 57, up to 57, it still remains liberal because a lot of the import licenses had already been issued for the whole year. So they, basically honored those licenses, and also up to 57, you still see relatively liberal flow of imports, but 58 onwards, it gets very tight. And by early 1960s, it is a very, very tight import regime. Consumer goods imports, other than which are essential like food, etc., are all completely gone. So this is where the three, all different sets of regulations come together. You got on investment, you got investment licensing. On imports, you got import licensing. And then you got foreign exchange control. Very complicated system, because if you are trying to invest, you're getting investment license. You may need machinery to be imported. Well, so there is another committee. So you go for import for investment licensing to one whole committee, and there is a whole big machinery through which you have to go through the hoops. And then you have to go to another committee to get the clearance on the Capital Goods Imports Committee, which has to give the clearance. And even if the licensing authority is willing to give you a license, if that committee says that no foreign exchange, so you don't get a license to import capital machinery, end of the story. You're not going to get make the license work because machinery is not there. So there's that. Then for your raw materials, for your intermediate inputs, if you need imports, then you have to go every 6 months. You have to go to a whole system to get your foreign exchange and get your import license. So import license would be issued for a year, but foreign exchange will be issued only for 6 months. So 6 months later, you still have to go for foreign exchange. If the foreign exchange authority says, sorry, there is no foreign exchange, then that import license is no good. And somebody has to ensure that import is essential. Somebody has to ensure that it is not domestically available. All this has a huge bureaucratic machinery in place. So you can imagine, and these are very difficult chapters to write, chapter 6 and 8 of my book were very tough to write because information was spread out. Different agencies were in different places. So everybody, they were all writing about different pieces in different places. So all this had to be pulled together. For the reader also, these are tough chapters to read, but I wrote them precisely to let the modern day generation, post 1980s born generation know what, today we might be complaining about GST and we're complaining about, taxation, etc. But just read what existed at the time, what industrialists, what individual had to really put up with. It is really, it'll embarrass even George Orwell. The system as it exists is real labyrinth of the system. So anyway, industrialists work with that. But very briefly, maybe Kumar, I'll take 5 more minutes to at least mention something about the lasting legacy. So this is what, when the growth obviously didn't happen of the kind that was required. We grew until about 1990 at an average growth rate of maybe a little below 4%, 3.8 or so. Population was growing at 2.2. So the per capita income growth was very little. So the poverty reduction was almost not there. So in terms of the outcomes in the end, the objectives of the planning were not realized. And 91, of course, there is liberalization that is unleashed, and we begin to grow a little better. Very briefly now, however, if we do a comparison of India and China, in China, now India, Nehru's, the book starts out talking about, these 2 different projects. One is the political project, which is to establish India as a democracy with universal suffrage, which was so uncommon in those days. And that is a very successful project of Prime Minister Nehru. But his economic project, as I've described, was a more or less complete failure. Now, the 2 interact, however. And whereas, in the Chinese case, after Mao passed away and Deng Xiaoping came in and said, oh, we are on the wrong road, he begins to change the system. And since he's operating in an authoritarian system, he's able to move much faster. He also faces internal opposition and all, but that is easy for him to control given the fully authoritarian system. We are in a democracy, and that is the most valuable institution. India kind of, that is what India values the most. And so in that system, however, you have to take people along. You have to, as you make the changes, you got to evolve consensus. There are opposition groups. There are groups will come in and strike against you. There are groups which will make themselves heard. There is media. There is whole sorts of forces at work. So the change was slow. So the kind of growth that, South Korea, Taiwan, China, etc., could experience because of their authoritative systems. Also, by the way, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, they were all authoritarian systems when this very rapid growth happened. Some people forget, they think that their democracies. No, democracy is much later development. When the fast, rapid growth happened, they were all authoritarian systems. And so they could bring these changes much faster. Particularly the Chinese case is a good one to compare with. And so India's system moved slowly. But within the Indian system, you see, there is a baggage that continues intellectually. What happens is, that in the system, there is inheritance of the old ideas to the newer generation. Now, the older generation is much larger at any given point in time. In any year or in a 2 years or 5 year time, there's a small addition to the population is happening, but the big population is what exists already. So in every field, it is the legacy that the older generation is giving to the newer one that dominates. So the socialist ideas from the political class go to the newer politicians. Similarly, socialist ideas from the intellectuals, mainly economists, go to the newer economists. Even your businessmen, the business people, they are also very socialist in their approach. Their ideas bequeathed to them are also, and then above all, you got the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is also very much steeped deeply into this socialism, and that socialism also gets bequeathed to the next generation. So, a new crop of IAS officers comes every year, or, civil service, top civil service comes every year. It's a small addition to the existing stock. It's the existing stock that trains the newer generation into its old ideas, which then get, embraced by the newer generation. And this legacy continues. And this is what also makes the change incredibly difficult. And this is where, I speculate that if you look at my kind of tribe, the economists, look for liberal economists who have been basically brought up and educated in the Indian institutions. It's hard, serious pro-market advocates. The endorsement of this or that liberalization is one thing. That now, in the change atmosphere, many people do it. But are they advocating for freer markets, freer trade, open markets, serious advocacy? I think you'll be hard pressed to find any. I mean, anybody you think of has been exposed, educated in the United States, not even UK, actually. UK, very few economists who get trained in UK actually come and champion the cause of the markets. It is largely the economists trained in the United States or who have lived, or some people who have had good exposure to Asia. And there they see the force of open markets and free trade at work. So, who were the champions of liberalization among the economists in the early years? These were like Abid Hussain, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Rakesh Mohan, Shankaracharya. These are all people, trained outside. So that I think still remains. I speculate in the book that, look, only one economist I can think of homegrown who is arguably homegrown and really is a champion of markets is Govinda Rao. But it's hard to go beyond that. So this has really, therefore, meant very slow change of the system. And I document that the opportunities for change come, but socialism continues to rule. I mean, first, there is a contest between Mrs. Gandhi and the syndicate of the Congress party. Syndicate supposedly less socialist. They're both socialists, but syndicate less socialist. Mrs. Gandhi more socialist. The more socialist side wins. Then, after emergency, Morarji Desai government comes in. Morarji Desai is in those days seen as a friend of the industrialists. What does he do for the industrialists during the 3 years, a little less than 3 years that he is the prime minister? Nothing. He is running exactly the kind of government that Mrs. Indira Gandhi was running. Then comes Rajiv Gandhi. I mean, so Indira Gandhi returns, of course, for 4 or 5 years, but Rajiv Gandhi comes in 85. Genuinely, he wants to end the socialist system. I mean, genuinely, there's a whole year of speeches he gives, I quote extensively from those and all. He really wants to change the system. He doesn't want to use word socialism in his speeches, actually. And the first budget he presents for 85-86 is a very liberal budget, very reform-oriented budget. And people like Nani Palkiwala, people like, Prem Shankar Jha, whoever has some in sympathy for liberalization, hails this budget as fantastic. But within a year, it's all gone. The senior Congress party leaders basically capture him. Within 6 months, in May 1985, there is Congress Party's AICC convention in Bombay, and basically they tell him that if you want endorsement by the Congress Working Committee of what you have already proposed in the budget, then you got to embrace socialism. That is the bequest of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and this is Jawaharlal Nehru's party. we cannot afford to leave socialism behind us. So at the end of the convention, when Rajiv Gandhi gives the speech, there are a lot of liberal references to socialism. He redefines it. He says that socialism to me means bringing poor people up, not pressing the richer people down. So he still sticks to his guns by redefining socialism, but nevertheless, he has to accept it as a part of the Congress party's agenda. And eventually, of course, the second budget is not such reformist anymore, and Nani Palkewala is again critical of the budget and so forth. So that is where it ends up. So that's a third opportunity or opening up to happen. It doesn't happen. And finally, it's in the face of a crisis and a very different kind of leader taking the helm, Narasimha Rao, Prime Minister Rao, bringing in Manmohan Singh as his finance minister, that finally a change takes place. There is something to be explained why a leader like Narasimha Rao, who was himself from the Nehru era, and actually was only 3 or 4 years younger than Indira Gandhi, why he opened up. That is a mystery also. So the book has a whole chapter which tries to explain Narasimha Rao, that how do we really understand what he did and what he decided to do. Because mind you that he not only opened up at the time. I mean, you can say that the crisis had forced it. There was no other way to go. So anybody who was the prime minister would have had to do it. But remember that that's not where he stopped. He then gave entry in telecommunications to the private operators. He gave entry in civil aviation to the private operators. He continued to liberalize financial markets. Bank entry became much more liberal. So a number of these steps were taken. So clearly, Narasimha Rao made a serious effort at liberalization. He was a serious liberalizer. So why that happened. And then we also know later on, Vajpayee carried on the reforms, but then for 10 years, UPA came back. Socialism actually had a return. You got Land Acquisition Act, you got Right to Education Act, you got the Food Security Act, you got retrospective taxation, all the kinds of things that economists of my kind of persuasion were arguing against were reintroduced. So this struggle between the socialist thought and the more kind of pro-market thought has continued in India, and socialism has a lot of followers. Even today, if you look at the education that we impart in the colleges, the professors are all steeped into the old kind of socialist tradition, and therefore the students that they are producing are also of the same kind. You basically try to reproduce yourself. I mean, all professors will be probably accused of that, but that is how it is. So I'll stop there, and hopefully we can still have some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panagariya, for that illuminating talk. I really enjoyed it. Though I must say that the future doesn't look too bright as yet. So I'll quickly use the privilege of being the moderator to ask the first question, and then we'll kind of continue with the lot of questions that have come in over Zoom and YouTube and directly as well. So I would like to quote briefly from the preface in the 1982 book by Friedman, Capitalism and Freedom. And he kind of talks about the crisis that he says, quoting him, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. So I think you briefly touched upon it. So I was wondering, given your deep sort of engagement as well understanding of both academia and policy and government. So I don't know if you foresee a crisis in the near future, but do you see those ideas around? So the kind of ideas that we maybe Shenoy have talked about, Bhagwati Pan, Padma Desai and others have talked about, are those ideas around? You see them?
No, I think now the times have changed. There is no doubt. We do have a constituency, meaning pro-market commentators and thinkers have a constituency. I mean, it's no longer the 80s. I mean, 80s, you had no constituency. Even I was very pessimistic. I thought that, given our bureaucracy, which thrives on these controls, will never get a change. I mean, so I was very pessimistic in those days. But then, once the 91 reforms happened, and even in infrastructure, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee started building these fantastic roads, then my pessimism went away completely. First set of pessimism went away with the liberalization of 91, that things can change. And then for a while, I was a bit apprehensive that, look, who is going to build infrastructure? For that, you have to rely on the government, and our government is completely incapable of building infrastructure. But then those roads that got built, Golden Quadrilateral, or what is it? Golden Quadrangle. Quadrangle. That really so I said, okay, we can even, our government can even build good roads. No, I mean, and also I would disagree a little bit with Milton Friedman's statement here that, crisis did open the door for reforms in India. But it did a bit more because, it could have ended where Narasimha Rao left it, or even first blush of reforms, the end to investment licensing and that devaluation and some opening of the trade sector, right? It could have been left there. But over time, constituency has grown. I mean, Bimal Jalan is a good example. Bimal Jalan, before liberalization, was very much believed in controls and all. But then I think somewhere in mid-1990s, he wrote a book himself. And he did a mea culpa there, saying that, I was really skeptical of the reforms, but I now support. And so many converts then came along. And nothing succeeds like success, because growth happened. You see, growth happened, poverty came down. So that strengthens the hand of the advocates of liberalization. So I'm not pessimistic at all. There will always, in a democratic system, there will always be periods when things are not happening. But the change will also happen. I mean, the beauty of it is that, like 10 years, I wrote very critically of the government. I mean, I first, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was finance minister, I wrote heavily in his admiration for doing what he had done. But then I also wrote very critically of him for almost 10 years. But whenever he did something which was liberalizing, like, he tried to bring in the entry of the in retail trade or something, right? The retailers, it didn't succeed fully, but still, door was opened by him. Like it was like, in 2011, 12, somewhere there. So I wrote very much applauding him for what he had done and all. So, and there are many more now, who complain about, and even among industrialists, some change. There's still, I think, on average, Indian industrialists, businessmen are still, not really market opening types. They import substitution, subsidies. These are the things they ask. They don't ask for policy change. And that complaint, I still have that complaint, that you would think that after having seen the liberalization work, they would become a force, lobbying force for liberalization, but they don't seem to do that. I mean, even like, free trade negotiations that are happening, where are our exporters? They should be there, lobbying for these free trade agreements, because they are going to be the beneficiaries. See, I understand those who are producing import competing goods, they have to then, if you open the market, then they have to compete against the free flow of imports. But the exporters are going to benefit. Where are they in this whole negotiation? You don't hear from them.
Yeah. On just a related note, before we move on to different sets of questions, I remember in 1995, Ashok Desai has written this piece, and I think you quote, if I'm not wrong, Swami Iyer and Ashok Desai as the only
Yes.
two exceptional journalists who have kind of taken up this. And in 95, Desai talks about that how one of the reasons that the push and the momentum of reforms never continued is because no political leader went out and tried to sell the reforms. So in that sense, the constituency of reforms, and therefore, in the recent example being the farm laws, farm bills, you wanted to push it, but unfortunately, there was not enough buy-in or public support and demand for it. I would just quickly would love your view on that. And the related question comes from Parth. He asks, how much do you feel that we have really shifted today from that approach to economy, irrespective of the labels government may use?
Yeah. So there are two or three questions in there, so I'll probably not catch them all. But, it is true that Narasimha Rao really didn't go out to sell the reforms, but Prime Minister Vajpayee did. Prime Minister
Mm.
Vajpayee used to, in his Independence Day speeches from the Red Fort would say that India needs double-digit growth. He was the first Prime Minister actually to come out and say India needs double-digit growth for to overcome its poverty. So Prime Minister Vajpayee was very vocal, and he certainly I would say, was an exception to that kind of statement. I think Prime Minister Modi has often not done that. Now he has a very long run, so there have been periods, and you mentioned the farm laws and all. I personally don't think that farm laws were turned down because of a lack of sufficient groundwork. I think that's a false narrative which has been peddled by many. But look, this reform was introduced in 2003 first through a model APMC Act by the Vajpayee government. And for almost 17 years, and through bipartisanship, both the Congress and NDA governments, both UP and NDA governments, tried to convince the states that these are good reforms, do them. They were actively all involved. Many states did actually adopt the model law, but ultimately they didn't use the model law effectively. So, and then even as late as 2019, I think there was a parliamentary committee with membership from all parties, which unanimously recommended that you need to end the monopoly of the middlemen at the PMC. So what are we talking? There was a lot of discussion that happened and had been going on for more than 1.5 decades. It is that the intermediaries in Punjab and Haryana, particularly Punjab, APMC mandis, were going to be adversely impacted, and they really mounted a very effective political opposition, aided by a lot of funds and money. I mean, you tell me outside of this, outside of Punjab or maybe Punjab plus Haryana, how many other states were opposing it? Nobody came to oppose it. So I don't buy that, but sometimes these setbacks happen. And that also, by the way, in the end had a detrimental effect on the implementation of the labor laws, which had also been passed in 19 and 20. So that's a bit, but that's the nature of the game, But those of us who are fighting for markets have to be there for the long haul. It is a battle you have to fight on a continuous basis.
Yeah, agree. I mean, a small group of people can definitely be more loud than others in asking for
I mean,
such
political
things.
space, it depends, because Punjab is right on the border of Delhi. And so that gives the Punjabi farmers obviously a lot more clout.
Yeah. Uh, uh, the next set of questions relates to moving away from a kind of
And by the
theme.
way,
Yeah.
B.R. Shenoy himself is a very good example of somebody, right? I mean, we at least have some hearing. He had zero hearing. But did he change his mind, or did he join in all this other crowd and all? No. I think this partly, of course, it's the integrity of thought of a scholar, which keeps him, those who believe in it, which he did plentifully, of course, and applauded by Jagdish Bhagwati himself for that. But he also believed that he was right. And so you have to have that. You have to have that.
Next question comes from Anirudh Datta, and another related question comes from Anonymous. I'll read Anirudh's question first. He says, India has done better than most Asian, Latin American, and African countries, except ASEAN and parts of North Asia after independence. And what do you attribute this relative success to? And what did India get right to avoid a similar fate? Kind of related, but maybe different question. Anonymous asks, if we compare Nehru's economic model with that of East Asian development states like South Korea, what could India have done differently?
Okay, I'll take let me take the second one first. Very, very good question, actually. The fundamental difference was that our development was driven by heavy industry. That had at least two disadvantages. One is the conventional one, which is the comparative advantage. You are a capital scarce country. You need to spread your capital. Very little capital is there. If you're going to make labor productive, then that's what you have to do. But if you put, so Milton Friedman put it beautifully. He said that, look, at one extreme, you have capital working with very little labor. And at the other extreme, you have labor working with almost no capital. Both are badly allocated. Both will work inefficiently, which has turned out to be true. South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, they all started with labor-intensive industry. You look at, and they very quickly became very competitive in the global marketplace. They didn't face the kind of import restriction, meaning the foreign exchange shortages that we did, because they could export. And they didn't mind. These were clothing, textiles, clothing, toys. These were the kinds of exports. South Korea, quite surprisingly, they found that, by 1971 or 72, within 8 or 9 years of this export-oriented approach, they started in about 1963. 10% of their exports were actually human hair for wigs, which nobody could have predicted. But the market works in a strange sort of ways. The entrepreneurs find out what is in demand. So that's a big difference. But the other aspect of this was that our model became exclusionary, meaning that large part of the people were excluded from either participation or benefits of growth. So some growth did happen in the industrial sector, but there were very few people involved employed in those sectors. It was heavily capital intensive industry. And that is a problem that continues till today, by the way. I mean, that bias, again, this is lasting legacy, lasting impact, that even today, look at our clothing exports, 14, 15 billion in a like 480 billion or $450 billion market of global marketplace. So what you are still doing is putting your capital in one place, labor in another. So you have 46% of your workforce in agriculture, and another nearly 40 to 45% in these micro and small enterprises, because they can't get capital, because all of the capital is taken. You got Reliance. Just think about how heavily capital intensive the refineries are. But then our successful sectors also is machinery. All kinds of machinery we manufacture. So all these are very capital intensive sectors. Or you are successful in IT sector, which is again very skill labor intensive. But for the bulk of the work, so you see, unless you use your abundant factor effectively, you're not going to get the kind of growth that you can get otherwise. You see, why? So this exclusion not only didn't work in terms of alleviating poverty, but it also impacted growth adversely, right? So we talk about inclusive growth which leads to inclusion, but there is also growth that itself actually gets impacted by the lack of inclusion. And because the process that we adopted basically excluded your most abundant factor, namely labor, your growth itself was slower. So lack of inclusion also has an impact on the growth rate itself.
I think that's one constant theme of your TOI articles. I keep saying that that's one thing that you keep talking about. and I like it very much. Thank you very much.
Well, that's a way to, that's a way of advocacy,
Thank
you
you.
see.
Absolutely.
I also say somewhere that in public policy, reputation is an asset, not a liability. You know, in the academic writing, you can't repeat, you know, if once it has been said, the original has been said, by repeating, you cannot get anything. Nobody will publish you. But in public policy, reputation is extremely important.
Next question is from Ajay Dev. He talks the issues on devolution. It says Jawaharlal Nehru's economic philosophy deliberately created a highly centralized planning system where the union held almost all taxation levers. Today, when states are responsible for 63% of government expenditure but have access to only 38% of total revenues, does the Finance Commission see this as a structural continuation of Nehruvian centralization? If so, how can future devolution formulas or institutional reforms correct this to make fiscal federalism more equitable and responsive to state-specific needs?
No, no. I mean, in my position, I don't comment on this kind of question. But one thing the person asking the question needs to do is go and check the data.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have the data.
I mean,
so yeah.
states have more than half of the tax revenues.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll just take another question from Himalon. It says, given that the second five-year plan emphasized heavy industries and import substitution under the Mahalanobis model, how does the government retrospectively assess the long-term distortions this approach caused, such as neglect of agriculture, employment generation, and inefficiencies in the public sector? Was the overemphasis on capital goods and state-led industrialization at the cost of rural development? I think the answer is obvious, but
so I mean, it was at the cost of rural population, I would say. I wouldn't say rural development. I mean, agriculture did actually finally, you know, in mid-60s, we did centrally address the productivity in agriculture. And agriculture did actually flourish eventually. And, you know, today we are more than self-sufficient. We are capable of exporting a lot of wheat, rice, etc. So, so in this sense, you know, agriculture has been attended to. Where I feel it hurt the rural population is that it did not create enough opportunities, jobs basically, in manufacturing and services, well-paid jobs, you know, to which they could go. See, if you look at any successful industrializers, again, you got a few examples. I mean, well, you can go back to, you know, the UK, the US, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, China, all these countries which successfully industrialized and successfully eradicated poverty. One of the most important features is that these economies created jobs in manufacturing and well-paid jobs in manufacturing and services, to which the rural workforce then migrated. You know, you start in 1960, South Korea has about, you know, 65% of its population, of its workforce in agriculture. This is 1960, almost 60 till 1963. And by 1990, that drops to well below 20%. And the urban population, which is also in the range of 25%, maybe it's 30% in Korea, but it crosses 80% by 1990. So you see, the point is that rural population not a static population. There is a migration which leads them to into urban spaces. And Korea really became very, very urban. You know, that's how, I mean, in the US, for example, why is it so easy now to take care of the farmers? It's very easy for the US because only 2% of the workforce is farmers. So 98% can easily take care of the 2%. But when 46% of your workforce is in agriculture, how do the remaining ones who are also not doing so well? I mean, there is only maybe 5-7% of the people of the workforce which is doing really well. You know, this is the highly capital and skilled labor intensive, large scale corporations. They are doing well. Otherwise, even the micro and small, large part of the urban economy or urban or non-agricultural economy, let's say large part of the non-agricultural economy is micro and small. So they are not even into this. So it's really like 5 to 10% at the most of the economy taking care of the at least 46% which are in agriculture. That's simply, how far can they go? I mean, we have actually, to the extent revenue resources permit, we have created these redistributive mechanisms, and the political system is responding to that. The whole competition for these subsidies, etc., that we see during the election time is basically a manifestation of the political system responding to this inadequacy we created effectively by not still not doing enough to open the doors to the labor intensive industry.
Thanks. Next question comes from George Pius. He asks on poor infra, what present scenario of India's infrastructure bridges collapsing every 1-2 years of constructions, and sometimes much earlier, poor quality of work in our infrastructure projects delays over 10-12 years. What could be India's future, especially for our next generation?
So this is a young man probably doesn't know the travels of those who saw no roads actually in India. Uh, it's a good time to complain about the quality of roads, because at least we have now built the roads. I mean, I, in my current position, has gone to 27 out of 28 states. I had to miss one because I was not feeling well at the time. And boy, the road connectivity that we now have is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Part of it is if you see the occurrence of these quality complaints is more. It's also because many more roads exist now, and because many more of us are driving on these highways to go, as opposed to taking the bus or taking the train. So we are seeing that. But it's a good thing. I mean, the process itself is good because it is through complaining as loudly as we can that, attention will get paid to the quality also. But the first thing is that, you got the roads. I mean, the kinds of bridges that we are today building finally, I couldn't imagine, I mean, look at the coastal road in Mumbai, which is the tunnel, is the first of its kind. That Atal Setu, first of its kind. A lot of the connectivity we have created actually, by the way, BRO, the Border Road Organization, which has the responsibility to build roads near the border at very high heights, 12,000, 13,000 feet. And I've gone on some of these roads, incredibly high quality roads, and absolutely fantastic, So these are all, small bumps on the road, so to say, literally so, which will be flattened over time. So we should, of course, as I said, keep complaining, but no reason to derive any pessimism out of that. I mean, I generally, the complaints are a manifestation of the fact that there are so many roads and so many people are traveling on them.
Thanks. So this next question comes on a very topical issue on protectionism. Shankar Rao Chirala asks, the advocates of free trade liberalism like USA is going back to protectionism. Even India and China is falling into the same line. Is it absolute nature of policy or circumstances that matter to decide the nature of economic policy of a country, whether liberalism or protectionism?
Paul Samuelson once somewhere said or wrote or something, that that protectionism is like the skin disease. You cure it in one place, it appears in another place. So that's a constant battle. This happens. But I think by and large, look, the liberalization we did from 1991 to 2008 or 2007 really got us very far already. So some reversal has happened, but that's a matter of, continuing to advocate and hopefully, And currently, there is a good opportunity for India. If this agreement with the United States gets signed up, that will be a lot of opening up, a lot of liberalization will happen. And that will probably also open the door to an agreement with the European Union. That politically it will become a little easier. And we have already signed one with the United Kingdom. We have signed one with Australia. New Zealand is also seeking. So in a way, the cure is also happening as as the disease might be striking in some places, but in other places we are also making progress towards that. I mean, let's see. Hopefully, we are hearing that the US-India agreement might be announced pretty soon. So let us hope. But those who believe in that liberalization has done good for India, have to come out and lobby for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question, one is from Subodh. He asks, you talked about legacy ideas. The 1991 reforms needed a crisis. For the next 10 reforms, do we need to have another one?
I'm not a crisis person, so I mean, in a way, you're right that a crisis will help. But at the same time, a crisis is not what we seek. We have to, continue with the reforms. I mean, certainly what you're saying is correct, that a crisis does make things easier in terms of a change, then people accept the change more easily. But neither I seek that, nor I see any prospects of that, because we have handled, one thing that India has done very well is the handling of macro. I mean, macro, we don't, I mean, even when COVID happened, right? I mean, that was a fantastic example of how prudent the Indian government was, because from within, there were massive attacks on the government that, because they wanted India to do what the United States and European countries were doing. And from all around, actually, the government was more or less surrounded by people, even, people who are otherwise very sensible, very measured and all. They were all calling for, print money and expand. But the government got the right diagnosis. I was probably the only economist, I would say, actually, at least outside the government, who was actually advocating what the government did. So I'm on the record having written that this was the right way to go, because I felt that, look, this was a supply shock as much as it was a demand shock. So unless you fix the supply side, just fixing demand side is only going to give you inflation. It's not going to give you a response. I mean, unless people can go to work, how can the economy start functioning? So this required a supply side, supply chain restoration as much as it needed the demand. So the government did the right thing, and those countries which actually thought that they could solve the problem from demand side without solving the supply side problem really ended up with massive inflation. I mean, the US got inflation for a while, going all the way to 20% or something, very unprecedented rates of inflation. So, okay, I mean, the central point of the question, unfortunately, the work of people like me is not going to become that easy, that a crisis happens and we get the reforms thrown into that. Very likely we'll have to continue to fight in a piecemeal fashion and convince the policymakers,
Thank you. Professor, we are, as per the schedule, we have limited time, almost none. But I was wondering if you have a few more minutes, we can take a few more questions and then close.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Next question, and I think you talked about it during planning era, the allocation on primary education was very small, minuscule. So Amit asked this question that B.R. Shenoy had a vision for a liberal education model that included the role for private schools. Do we see the scope of realizing that model in India today or tomorrow?
Well, privatization is happening. basically because of the generally overall poor quality of the education in public schools. Children, I mean, any parent who can even, because also what has happened is because of the, one of the things is that the parents realize it, that without education, there is no future for the children. So they want the children to get whatever best education they can afford. So, they will go through all sorts of hardship to put their children in private schools if they can. And the market has also responded because there are schools with tuition fees as low as 100 rupees, 150 rupees per month. So at that fee, those schools become very much within reach of a large chunk of the population. So you can see the data are showing, except during the COVID era, for which the reasons were different, that, there was some movement back into public schools. But other than that, there has been a steady shift of children from public to private schools. I mean, frankly, it will be good if the government would legitimate that by, simply giving the power back to the parents, meaning the financial power. But politics of it is very different. The teachers unions are very powerful, and they're very large, so they're a powerful force. Also, the governments like to spend money, create jobs. So one of the places where they justify, it's relatively easier to justify um, uh, uh, expenditure is education. And large part of the education expenditure is really teacher salaries.
Yeah. Thank you. That probably one of the last question that we'll take. I think you must have covered it, but I'll just quickly check anyway. Chetna asked this question: what role did the political climate of the early years of independence play in silencing or marginalizing voices like Shenoy's? I think.
Say that again. In silencing?
Or marginalizing voices like
Yeah.
Shenoy's.
No, it was not politics. It was not politics. The economic scene on India, I mean, the academic scene, right, was not accepting of the Shenoy view at the time. It was hardly, there was no, as I said earlier, that even you look back at Milton Friedman, 1955, he was not yet quite accepted within the US. It's much after that he acquired, he was such a persuasive academic. I mean, he really argues. I mean, his power to argue was just incredible. But it took time. It took quite a bit of time. So Shenoy was simply well ahead of his time. You see, very interesting in the book I mentioned this, the review that of Shenoy's book that Bhagwati did. So Bhagwati was relatively complimentary, but in the end, he also was a little critical, saying that, I mean, this is Bhagwati now, Bhagwati and this, who very soon themselves wrote the Bhagwati Desai. He sort of said, criticizing the ground that, that the Shenoy is hostile to the whole idea of planning, right? So that's an economist who actually is seen as an advocate of liberalization, right? But and the view Bhagwati and Desai took was that, look, planning scope should be reduced. But they in Bhagwati and Desai book, they don't say that eliminate planning or do away with it. They say that, look, one thing, give more flexibility to the exchange rate, something that Shenoy had been constantly arguing as well. But he also said that, you don't try to plan everything. Just the specific a few sectors that you want to develop. Just focus on that and leave the rest of it to the, So he didn't, at least till 70. Even Bhagwati and Desai really didn't speak in terms of, do away with planning. So that tells you that, look, to be salient, you had to have a hearing, to be in sync somewhat. You had to be a little more in the middle. And what Shenoy was arguing really practically he was the lone voice. I mean, I at that time, who else? I mean, within India, there was nobody. In fact, even after him, it took a very long time, you know. I mean, people may now come in and say, "Oh, I was interested in liberal, etc." But this all afterwards, you don't find any record of these people. Many of these people having actually come out to advocate.
Just today morning, I was watching this video where Jagdish Bhagwati talks about when their book came out, Bhagwati and Padma Desai's book came out, how
Yeah,
they were called marginal economist. And
yeah,
then he's talking. He himself is in the video interview says that I took that as a matter of pride because marginal revolution is a very important thing for economists to be called themselves. So he said,
absolutely,
uh,
absolutely. So in fact, so I refer to their book also, and I read at least 6 reviews of that book. They were all uniformly critical, and I described the three of them, of which one is by, guess who? None other than Dr. Manmohan Singh. And Dr. Manmohan Singh also, after giving a little bit of compliment at the beginning, ends by saying that, markets don't have answer to everything.
yeah. And just to before I conclude, one small anecdote with Bhagwati shared. He talks about in the interview that after 1991 reforms, Manmohan Singh was in DC and we had a good meeting of all the industrialists of the US, like Boeing and others. And Bhagwati and Desai were the only academicians invited. And Manmohan Singh says that if we had listened to what Bhagwati and Desai talked about in 66, which is 25 years ago, I didn't need to have this meeting with all the businessmen. So he
That's
concludes
correct.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
No,
Shenoy and
I know
Bhagwati
of
and the
this. I
man.
know of this,
Yeah. Yeah. He
that
was.
Manmohan Singh said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So
following up on that, there is another thing that Manmohan Singh told Jagdish Bhagwati, who in turn told me. He told Jagdish, you think that you and I are doing the reforms. No, it's the children of the politicians who all study in the US, who tell their parents that, you know, why have you been left so far behind? And that is what has, persuaded the politicians to the change.
yeah, less than
So
$3,000
you
per
see,
capita income. Yeah.
these things can have impact in all sorts of different ways in which we don't understand.
Yeah. Except unfortunately, it's a little slow. We would want it to be a little
It is slow.
faster.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
very
No,
slow.
no doubt. This is why,
$3,000.
you really have to have passion for it if you're going to,
Yes.
if you believe in it, and if you feel that it is really something very important for the country.
Yeah.
But most people actually, may have right ideas, but they lack the passion. And that,
Yeah.
and that of course means that then their ideas really don't um, serve the kind of social purpose that they could.
Yeah, at a low base, we need to. Thank you very much, Dr. Panagariya, for being so generous with time. So this brings to a close the B.R. Shenoy Memorial Lecture 2025. On behalf of the Economic Research Center, Bangalore and Center for Civil Society, I would like to thank our speaker, Professor Panagariya, for such an illuminating talk and engaging with questions from the audience. Most importantly, also thanks to the audience for asking those great questions. Thanks also to my colleagues at CCS, Saurabh, Ginny, Chetna, Ravi, Kunal, Ayushi, Pratiksha, and Varsha, who helped organize the lecture. And good evening, and have a great evening, everyone.
All right. Good.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor
Thanks.
Panagariya. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Lovely.
Thank you. Bye.
I don't know if
Bye
you
bye to all.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Subodh here. See,